Hi, and welcome to Rate That Album, a back and forth album review revisit of sort between myself, Joe Fremming. With me is Paul Muad'Dib. This is a new project we're doing. This is since we have come pretty much to the close on Twin Peaks, we decided let's talk music. How you doing, Paul?
Well, the world's on fire, but as the recording of this podcast, I shouldn't laugh, but it's a defense mechanism. I'm all right. Yeah,
Billy Joel said they didn't start it.
Yeah,
right?
Billy Joel said they didn't start the fire. That's what they're going to bring to court. Well, Billy Joel said.
It's always been turning, man.
It's always been turning. Since the writers were shitting in the Capitol walls. Fuck. No, I'm excited for this. I've been preparing for this episode. With Twin Peaks kind of rolling up, ending up. I think we got one episode left of filming this or recording this, I should say, to do. But other than that, yeah, I'm excited to get full into this. So. I believe the rules of this we'll explain to our listeners. This is a new project that we've been spitballing, so this is the first iteration of it. Much like Cast That Movie, we're going to go back and forth each week, picking an album for both people to listen to. This week, starting, was Joe's turn to pick the album, and with that, Joe is going to give us the history of the album, some interesting tidbits about the album, and then we're going to go back and forth kind of on highlights, lowlights, thoughts on different tracks, the album as a whole, just general takeaways of what we feel on the album. Does that sound about right, Joe?
It does.
Perfect. So, Joe, tell the audience the album that you picked.
Okay. So to start this off, I kind of wanted to go with something that is easily accessible, which turned out to be one of this group's most densely filled albums. I went with Paul's Boutique by Beastie Boys. I love Beastie Boys, and I figured that what a better way to begin this podcast by you and I dorking out on these guys. It's fun tidbit. Paul and I used to hang out with Paul every now and then in our 20s. Mm-hmm. We'd go to a karaoke bar, and the only song I would do was Fight for Your Right to Party with Paul, because I can't sing, I can only scream.
I was so glad when you got up on stage with me. I was so happy. I was happy as pig and shit when you did that. Yes, that was so much fun. We did that a couple of times, too. Yeah, it was awesome. And we rocked it, man. We totally rocked it. I mean, the audience was always into it because it's one of those songs.
Yeah, and it's one of those songs that actually kind of leads to what Paul's Boutique is, because, let me get into this. Before we talk about the album, let's rewind and lead up a little bit of the history leading up to this album. All right, and jump in whenever you feel like it, Paul.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in the mid to late 70s, Beastie Boys began as a hardcore punk band. With them, when there's heading into becoming more popular, they add Kate Schellenbach, who would eventually move on to Luscious Jackson, is their drummer.
Holy shit.
Yeah. They meet Rick Rubin in his dorm room, because he has mixing equipment, recording equipment. And they meet Russell Simmons, who's has created a new record label called Def Jam. All these things kind of coalesce into them moving away from more of punk and more into hip hop. This move eventually causes them to fire Kate Schellenbach from their band in a pretty bad way that they've apologized to her over the years. Much of this was at the urging of Rick Rubin. A lot of this I've picked up from their book, Beastie Boys book, and she writes a chapter about this.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so going in, they record, we're not going to go over the whole history, but they record License to Ill, which is groundbreaking in a sense. It kind of opens the door to hip-hop on MTV, A lot of it probably has to do with the fact that it's more digestible for audience at that time because these guys are white guys.
White Jewish guys from New York. Yeah, and I want to say, first of all, I love that album, and I'm probably gonna jump into something you're gonna say here, but I know people say it's a very sophomoric, childish album, but I mean, it's done. The satire is there, so I don't know how people didn't catch it.
Yeah, well, because the satire got lost on a lot of the fans, and that kind of goes back to why this album became what it was. Because the big hit was our karaoke song "Fight for Your Right to Party." This is a meathead song. It's tongue in cheek. But people took it pretty like these guys are party guys. They thought they were like 80s rock star party dudes, which they weren't. I mean, these are the guys. These guys were they came of age like worshiping Bad Brains and Black Flag and Minor Threat and all these like DC hardcore bands.
Right.
But what happens is they record this and record this album, and it blows up. And they're touring it with a giant inflatable penis. They eventually see themselves becoming what they hate.
Yes.
They're playing, went from playing a role became becoming the role.
Yeah, I will say, that was something that I think is well known, even with people that maybe are outside the Beastie Boys. There was a lot of interviews with other artists and things about the Beastie Boys, and yeah, they became the thing that they hated, and they that created some issues for them.
Yeah, eventually they've apologized for a lot of the content on that album over the years, especially the homophobia and straight up sexism.
Oh yeah,
it was just kind of, it's a part of the times, and it's also, some of it's tongue in cheek. So that happens. Then they end up being financially screwed by their label Def Jam. What happens is Russell Simmons keeps putting them out on tour, and then him and Rick Rubin hold back album royalties from them because they're not putting out a new album. It was a catch-22 thing, which eventually led to a lot of acrimony and them eventually leaving Def Jam.
Mm-hmm. And now, correct me if I'm wrong. I know this is going a little bit sidetracked, but that was also very commonplace with Def Jam, if I'm not mistaken.
From what I've heard, yeah. Rick Rubin he's done a lot of great albums, but he's a pretty bad runner of a label.
Mm-hmm.
Is his label after Def Jam, which was Def American, which became American Records.
Yeah.
He had a similar falling out with Black Crowes and Glenn Danzig.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I give him, he is one of those legendary producers, though.
Yeah, he's super talented. He's just not. I don't think he's very good at dealing with people and dealing with finances and all that.
Sure. Absolutely.
So this happens. They leave Def Jam. Then they go on hiatus. During all this, Adam Yauch, MCA, who's basically seen as the architect of this group, he's telling people he doesn't really want to do Beastie Boys anymore. In fact, he forms a kind of a super group called Brooklyn with members of Bad Brains around this time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. You can only find maybe some live stuff from them, but they never recorded anything. But the interesting thing is Adam Horowitz, Ad Rock, moves to LA. And here he's kind of like, he needed to get out of New York. He needed to get away from the other guys, especially with get away from Rick Rubin, Russell Simmons, and Def Jam. Just take a breather. And he goes to a party and he meets these two kind of like music dorks, and they play him some demos that they're working on. These two will end up being known as the Dust Brothers, who at this time are not that, but they end up as probably after their work with Beastie Boys, probably Beck's Odelay is probably one of their best known, groundbreaking productions.
Mm-hmm. I'm keeping my mouth shut on that because I have something to say about that when we get into the album.
Okay. So what happens is they play some demos. Horowitz gets in contact with the other two. You guys have to hear this. They end up all kind of moving out to LA. So they're kind of working on a follow-up, and they sign on with Capitol Records, which is, it starts off with big fanfare, but Capitol, let's just get into it. I'll get into the Capitol thing right here.
So yeah, please.
And I'll kind of backtrack. So what happens is they go to Capitol, they record this album that most labels would probably be pretty pissed since it's wildly different from the album that made these guys famous.
Mm-hmm.
But Capitol's excited. They do a big gala, big party announcing Beastie Boys are on their label, and this album, Paul's Boutique's coming out. And then they don't really promote it. What happens is they decided to put their promotional efforts more into a new Donny Osmond album.
What the fuck?
Yep. And they told
that's going to pay off.
Yeah. They told the Beastie Boys pretty much, well, next time. Which is kind of like, you can tell how much money record labels were making at this time, where they could just tell one of their artists, like, it doesn't need to sell. But what this does is eventually this kind of attitude with the Beastie Boys gives them pretty much creative control throughout the rest of their career. Capitol just never mucked with them that much after this. They're just kind of, they'll put out an album, all right.
That's so awesome. That's awesome back in the day, right? When record companies used to do that.
Yeah. But, they consistently sold. The Beastie Boys were never big sellers. At least not until probably toward the late 90s after Sabotage blows up.
Mm-hmm.
But to backtrack, they record these demos for what would become Paul's Boutique with the Dust Brothers. They're fantastic, and then they have this idea, well, maybe we should re-record these in nicer studios. So they're jumping from studio to studio. They go to like the classic one where like Fleetwood Mac recorded Rumors, and they're just failing to catch the magic of what they got on the demos. But at this point, it's too late. They're hundreds of $1,000s in recording, so they got to go with what they go with. So they re-record the album, puts it out. Like I said, Capitol doesn't really promote it. It falls like a kind of a lead balloon. The fans of Licensed to Ill are not really keen on this, and we'll get into it when we talk about the album, because it's vastly different than what they did before.
It is vastly different.
Yeah. So, and it doesn't help that there was only like a couple songs that could be considered singles. The only one that really pops out is Hey Ladies, which is a radio friendly, or not friendly, but radio-esque single, but that is what happens. And then from this point on, they don't have interference. They're a consistent seller. Their follow-up, Check Your Head, sells better. And then after that, Ill Communication sells. And then the rest is history. But that's kind of the lead-up. So, Paul, let's talk Paul's Boutique.
Let's talk Paul's Boutique. It's been a long time since I've heard this album front to back. I have songs from it on my playlists. I'm not good at sorting my playlists, so I just hit, add things to it. So on my YouTube music likes, I have like 1,500 songs in just this one playlist. So at this point in my life, I just run that thing on shuffle. And I wanted to find the original version of it. And what I mean by the original version of it is that there was a 25th anniversary remaster, but I couldn't find anything other than that to listen to. But it is, when you look at what they did from Licensed to Ill to going to Paul's Boutique, it is a metamorphosis of completely, vastly different things that are going on there. You look at you brought up Odelay, and this is Odelay 1.0. This really is like, I was listening to this and I'm like, man, I didn't realize that Beck took so much from this album, but understanding that the Dust Brothers produced it and produced Odelay, as soon as you said that, like, it made sense to me in my head. These guys, this is intelligent rap. I mean, I know it's weird. I know it's hilarious. It's clever. There's some jokes in there, some dissing, but this is like straight up. When you look at what they did on Lights and Nail and look at what they did at here, it's kind of like the Marshall to Eminem.
Yeah,
in my mind.
Yeah, it's when you listen to License to Ill. And, it's kind of hard. Since this is a sophomore, you kind of have to compare it to what it came before.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty bare bones. When you listen to it, the beats and, like, the loops and the samples. And it's really, it's good, but it doesn't, like, you listen to this, and it's so heavily sampled. Like, so much sampling.
So much sampling. We'll get to a point, but there was some significant odes to some rap greats in this album.
Oh, yeah. The Beastie Boys, it feels like on every album they pay tribute to the guys that came before them,
mm-hmm.
their influences. But yeah, this is such a, again, it's heavily dense, and it comes in and it's like, it starts off with like kind of like a slow lead in that leads into, it's called To All the Girls and To Shake Your Rump. And it's just there's so much going on. It's a great headphones album.
Yes. Yep. I was listening to it on headphones today. Yep.
Yeah. And going back to what you're saying, like, listen to the CD, the original master of this before it was remastered. A lot of the problems with that is it's a flat master. It's a flat mix.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't sound very good. It's one of the reasons I didn't listen to it as much when I first started getting into the Beastie Boys. I didn't get into them until like late 90s. Like, I knew who they were, but it was such a flat mix. And then when they did the remasters, they did a remaster in 2010 on vinyl, and I bought, or not 2010, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like night and day.
I was going to say, this sounded way better than what I remembered. And that's why I wanted to find the original one, because a guy that we both know, a friend of mine, you know him. We went to school with him, but Mojo, my buddy Jeff, he was huge he was really ahead of his time when it came to some of the music he was listening to. And when Paul's Boutique came out, he had that almost on a constant. I remember working for the newspaper in high school, which is oddly enough, given where you went in your career and where I went in my career, how the hell I ended up doing the newspaper. But we would sit in that room and we'd listen to things like Paul's Boutique at the time, and other albums that were scoffed at the time and maybe not as well liked, and became like really well loved as time went on. It was crazy. It was really crazy. Like, he really knew what was going to be good.
Yeah. And again, this fell like a lead balloon. Again, people were expecting Fight for Your Right Part 2, and they were given, The Sounds of Science.
Right.
Chicken Dinner.
I love that. Yes.
So, it's so that was another thing going against it. But what I appreciate about an album like this is like just how ambitious it was. And like, given like, I don't think a lot of people realize how hard sampling was at this point in history. They're using tape.
Yes.
And loops, and the machines they had could only sample maybe up to 3 or 4 seconds of a song at a time. You couldn't sample large 40 seconds, you only got a little bit of time to sample.
Yep, and that's a wonderful point to bring up because now you can throw. I mean, I have a sampler machine, and I can just plug in, and do whatever I want with it, right? I don't use it a whole lot because now there's things, even like programs, where I can just record what it is and do some maneuvering, and I can remove audio, I can remove whatever, and sample exactly what I want. That was not easy. I mean, it was truly an art back then, and I don't think people give it enough credit to sampling back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, it was a process. It was not. Yeah, it was probably a bigger pain in the ass than most people would assume. But I mean, and back then it took you actually had to listen to albums all the way through to find certain beats that you'd like. Mm-hmm. Certain hooks. It's just it's a bygone era at this point. I mean, sampling's still there, but I think it's more streamlined to actually find what you're looking for instead of discovering what.
Oh yeah, it's way easier now. I mean, it really, really is. Yeah.
All right. So, Paul, let's talk about some standout tracks.
So, the standout ones to me on this album were Johnny Ryall, Eggman, Sound of Silence, 3 Minute Rule, which I didn't expect it to be based on that. Hey ladies, the Shake Your Rump, although it was good, I didn't think it was. I think the ordering could have been a little bit better. Like I think they would have gone with Johnny Ryall, then Shake Your Rump. I think it would have been maybe a little bit more flowing. Those are some of the more standout ones, and then of course you got B-Boy, which I'll talk about. What about for you? What were some of the standouts for you?
Well, my favorite Beastie Boys song of all time is Eggman.
It's so good, right?
It starts with the Superfly bass line, and it's just the references and the storytelling, and it even recycles one of their old punk songs, Egg Raid on Mojo. They rip themselves off.
That's awesome.
Some of the lyrics on there. So I love that. Shadrach, I love.
Yes.
Hey Ladies, Sounds of Science, just like, holy shit, they sampled the Beatles.
Right. That I was catching that, and I was like, Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah, you got some balls to sample the Beatles. That's some high shoes to fill. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, 3 Minute Rule, like you said. It's just those stand out, and it's weird because I can throw them on a mix, but it always feels like it feels better when I listen to the actual album. It's one of those few times when I listen to like these kind of tracks. It's also weird because they kind of blend into each other.
Yes, and I think that was the total vibe I was getting with this one too. I was like, because again, I have certain tracks, as I said, from there. I haven't really listened to the full album front to back in quite a few number of years. And that's why I was getting also the Odelay vibes, because it's like the song, it's flowing, it has a rhythm to it. I mean, this is a real album, that really goes. I mean, you could sit there and say, yeah, there are some filler songs. There is some things in there. Maybe we'll get to that. But I mean, even to have it go from like To All the Girls and have it end with AWOL, which brings it back around, is a very like album thing.
Yeah.
Pink Floyd was notorious for doing that with several of their albums.
Yeah. And Beatles to an extent too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these guys, you can tell they're record nerds.
Yes.
These are not the cool guys in school. These are us. This is us.
This is us. These are people that would sit down and listen to head music and really absorb themselves into an album.
And I think that's what kind of like was the appeal for me. Is just like, oh man, I feel like these guys in the sense like I'm not very cool. I listen to like all these weird fucking albums, like imagining all sorts of weird pop culture references, you know.
Yeah, and there is a ton in this. There's a ton of pop culture references and throwaways, and it's smart. I mean, I think that's the big thing that really is the big takeaway from, License to Ill, which was, again, for me, the satire was there, but it was missed, and that happens a lot. That happens a lot in music. And to have them go from License to Ill to this, and the lyrically, I mean, it goes to show that they are to go from right away from a freshman album to a sophomore album and improve the way that they're rapping and what they're rapping about it cannot be understated.
Yeah, they feel more confident in what they're doing here too, as opposed to that. And it's just like a line like Sam the Butcher bringing Alice the Meat, Fred Flintstone rolling around in bald feet, like just like it's like, I think for me, like, it was hard to get into rap at a younger age because I didn't relate. Which is like, it's not. I love hip hop, so like I grew into appreciating it a lot more. It's just like when this stuff was coming out, and like in the age when I started getting into these guys, and like I'm, look at the fucking Showdown.
Yep.
Cast that movie, like, of course these guys were ripe for like brains like ours.
Yes, absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, I think it didn't really hit the consciousness until Sabotage, in my mind, because that's one of those cross directional songs, and it was getting played on, it started getting some of their songs that maybe weren't rock songs on rock radio, and it was getting rock music played on stations that didn't typically play rock music. In our town, there's a, I don't even know if it's there anymore, but there was a pop music station called KCLD, and it is not rock or progressive friendly. It's all pop.
Top 40.
It's top 40. Yeah, it's top 40 pop. And to have something like Sabotage playing on it was like, whoa, this station's becoming cool. No, they weren't, and they never did.
Yeah. Sabotage was a weird thing, but they also got KCLD to start playing like License to Ill stuff.
That's what I mean. Yeah. I mean, what you want was getting played on hard rock stations. That's not a hard rock song.
No, but it just kind of shows us like these guys were just such an amorphous blob of like everything. Like it's hard to like, they're a hip hop group, but it's hard to pick, the like sound wise with layers and samples. Like the only hip hop group that I can kind of compare them to would be A Tribe Called Quest.
Yes.
Like these guys in Tribe, which there's some crossover. They knew each other and appeared on albums, but it's just like those two were like doing this like basically it's fucking outer space hip hop. It's like Africa Bambaataa on more drugs.
Right. Kinda. Yeah. I mean, it was lost at the time. And I mean, you got to think about when it came out, right? It came out in
89.
In 89. I mean, in 89, Winger was still putting out music.
Yeah. It's the era of hair metal. And then like with hip hop takes another left turn with more what was dubbed gangster rap. So you had NWA, and like Public Enemy, and I love both those guys.
I love both
those groups too.
Yep, absolutely.
But it was just like hip hop was evolving into something different, but at the time when this came out, almost nothing sounded like it. It was like
nothing.
It almost felt like hip hop jazz in a sense.
Yeah, it was. It's it's reminded me of a friend of mine. I'm glad you said that because this brought back to a conversation I had when Kid A came out, and then Kid Amnesiac, and she was trying to, kind of explain to someone what Amnesiac was. And she said, it's really Radiohead's jazzy album. And, and this is definitely has some like Beastie Boys' jazz album. It's funky. It's offbeat at times. It really utilizes the space between normal progressions. And it's very experimental. And again, we talked a little bit about it, but in 1989, butt rock was starting to turn into grunge a little bit. Grunge was just starting to come out. Rap was starting to change more in the gangster rap. And, pop music will always be what pop music is. But, that was kind of even changing from what 80s pop music was, like Sheena Easton, to more 90s Paula Abdul style and Mariah Carey style pop music. I mean, there were a lot of shifts going on, and this was one of those shifts that went widely unnoticed and unrecognized.
Yeah, it probably took 10 years for people to really start appreciating this album more.
Absolutely, completely agree.
But yeah, this was like, it was a seismic shift in like pop culture. But like there's a lot of bands that I love will reference this album as like one of those turning moments. Questlove from The Roots.
Yes. Yep. Questlove has said a lot of good things about Paul's Boutique.
Yeah. So people who are really into music are in like, this was kind of like, oh shit. They're changing things up, and that's what I love about it. And not just that, I love this album just because overall it's interesting. It has a lot going on. It keeps my attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. That's not always a prerequisite for me to enjoy an album. I can listen because I listen. God knows I listen to enough depressing bullshit. To, to be able to be like, yeah, this album, and I do a lot of design work, and when I do design, when I'm trying to do like more intricate Photoshop things, InDesign things, I will throw on Paul's Boutique to like get the creative juices flowing.
I think that's very, very smart. Yeah, and like I said, my buddy Jeff, who when this came out, again, it was 89, but he later went on. He was such a music nerd that he later went on to DJ for years at KBSC, which was the college station. And I think this and other things, like he would go down to. He'd have his mom take him down to, I think he biked even at that age. He biked downtown to the Electric Fetus and would go through and pick out things that wasn't getting played on the radio just to find out like what this was.
Yeah. And I had friends who would pick up the samples. So when I started getting into this album, it was like, again, late 90s, so internet's there, and this album was one of those albums that was dissected once people had an avenue to which to like share their dissections. And so like some people, there's websites devoted, like has every single element of every single sample itemized. I don't have the time for that myself.
No, we don't have the time for that. We do these. We do a weekly podcast. We don't have the time for that.
No. Okay. So it's just interesting that it's such a weird album and such a creative outburst that it's inspired people to do that. I love that too.
I love that too. You and I, there'll be albums down the road, but you and I remember having discussions in classes and sometimes at lunch about certain albums and kind of analyzing what they were trying to say in those albums. And we've had that conversation several times, I think, throughout the years now, as we've started reconnecting and doing this. So now to you though, is there any down tracks or tracks that you go that you just don't feel when you listen to this?
Yeah. One of them is What Comes Around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just don't like that. In Beastie Boys' book, too, Adam Horovitz says he doesn't care for that song.
Yeah, it's a low light. It's a low light.
And then for me, the B-Boy Boule it's interesting, but it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I hope I don't get my creds taken away, but it's interesting, but like I usually cut it when it gets to that point. I don't know. It just doesn't work for me, I guess.
Now that's where I found a lot of the references was in B-Boy Boule. References to Slick Rick, references to Dougie Fresh, references to a lot of the early 80s pioneers of rap. But that's I respect it because like, okay, they're throwing out the respect there, but at the same time, I have a real problem, especially now. I think if it was on back in the day on record or on vinyl or tape where it flows easily, I'd probably like it more. But this is one of those problems that I have with some albums where they have like the small 30 seconds clips that are supposed to flow together. It's supposed to be kind of this artistic thing, but that got lost in the invention of CD. And even even on streaming media, because you have that pause, that 2-3 second pause between ends and starts, that takes away the original flow and the intent of it. So I can totally see why you don't. And it was difficult because I just wanted to get to the next part. So I'd rather have seen on this remaster, if they had done it, just make it track 15 and make it just one original song.
And I think that's how it was on the CD. It was just one track on the original. Unfortunately, that was like a flat master in my opinion. So like it was even a worse experience for.
Sure, absolutely.
Because it just didn't pop like it did with the remaster. So.
No, and you have to understand.
Don't get me wrong. I still like it. I'm not a huge fan of it. This is an album where I can't really say there's a bad track. It's just like there's just some things I'm just like indifferent to. Another one would be Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun.
Thank you for saying that. That was one that I somewhat dislike. It just didn't do anything for me.
It feels like they're satirizing gangster rap, but it just it just
felt
doesn't. Forced. I don't know.
Yes, because again, gangster rap was also so new, but this also gives you an idea of how ear to the ground they were. Now, I think it's very important for our audience to realize where we come from. We come from white bread, Midwest Minnesota, about an hour north of Minneapolis, where that's far enough in the 80s, in the 90s, to be completely cut off from cutting edge music. And it was that way we did not have radio stations in town or really a means at the time. You got to understand it was radio. All we really had was the one record store, which was
Electric
Fetus, where you ended up working at for a while. And I believe we had a Suncoast in the mall at one point that sold albums or something else. Where was it? It used to be right next to Sears. I can't remember.
Sam Goody.
Thank you. It was Sam Goody. Yeah, there was the Sam Goody, but that was it. And again, you didn't know these out. You didn't know the Beastie Boys. You didn't know Slick Rick. You didn't know any of the subculture of music because it was never allowed to be played on our radio stations and be heard.
Yeah, it wasn't until the mid 90s when I think more stores started opening up and the dawn, I'd say, of the internet. The internet really helped, especially expanded my horizons.
Yes.
Otherwise, it was just like knowing somebody who listened to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I will say also, I think KVSC, the college radio station, also really opened up some doors.
Yeah. But, what did I know back when I was like, 11, 12, 13? Like, I didn't know shit about KVSC.
No, I mean, when this album came out, you also got to understand, we were 8 years old.
Yeah, we were not the demographic.
We were not the demographic for this album.
Actually, I'm pretty sure. I don't know what the demographic for this album was.
I have to think it was for. This feels like Dave Chappelle show. Like this was for their friends.
Yeah,
is what this feels like.
And that it also feels like all their albums afterward.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're just whatever they liked or caught on to. And I think that's an it's not every band or artist can do that. But I think Beasties could.
Yes. And I also think it was the freedom from the record company. Because you would have, there was record companies that would, come after, oh, great, you just put out this album. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like this new thing. You guys should go in that direction. And there was, and that's become more and more and more and more prevalent is the labels wanting a certain sound from every one of their artists.
Yeah. Hence everything sounds the same.
Yeah, I mean,
that's always been top 40 in a sense. But.
Well, in a way, but I mean, I love Sub Pop records, right? I love Sub Pop records. They've given us the resurgence of shoegaze, but every one of their artists still has that Sub Pop feel. There's nothing really outside the norm of outliers, even within the Sub Pop culture. Within Sub Pop records, and I see that a lot, with certain labels. But we can get in that another time.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a weird time. So this album, even by the time I started getting into it, around 98, 99.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about.
I still don't even know if I knew somebody who was into this album. I probably bought it at the Fetus. Oh, what's this Beastie Boy?
Yeah, I mean. Again, I knew my buddy Mojo was really into it. He was really, really into it. And he was into things, again, he was so ahead of his time, when Pulp started making the rounds. He was the only person I knew that listened to Pulp. And, some other bands that were, had bigger careers outside of our ecosystem, as it were. So is there anything then, when it comes to this album, I mean, I guess, would you recommend this album?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this album is quintessential headphone music, I'd say. Especially in the 90s, the 90s felt like it was the last era where big labels would put out headphone music.
Yes.
The big labels. Bands are still doing it, but typically they seem to be on their own or their own labels.
Yes.
But this was kind of the last hurrah decade. It would not even just because it's easy to throw hard rock, 9 Inch Nails, great headphone music. But even with hip hop, Dr. Dre.
Oh, yes.
The Chronic. Amazing.
The Chronic. Amazing headphone album, right?
Yeah. Tribe Called Quest. Amazing headphone music.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go back to Odelay because, like I said, this Odelay is just Paul's Boutique 2.0 in my mind. It really is. That's a wonderful headphone music, and or even before that, for the audience that's maybe younger that's listening to this and don't remember, in the 60s and 70s, when there was new forms of audio, Pink Floyd, for example, was huge in the quadraphonic. The Who was huge in the quadraphonic. These things, and what really sucks is I'm recording this on 7.1 surround sound headphones. I don't know of many. The only album that I truly know that's 7.1 is a Beatles remaster. That was remastered in 7.1. But nobody's doing it.
No, that's part of Neil Young's crusade. His bumbled crusade, I'll say. I can get into Pono and the junk science behind that, but
right?
Not here.
Fair enough.
We're not here to talk about Neil Young.
No, we probably will at some point because I'm probably going to throw an album your way at some point for that.
Artists.
So yeah, I'm going to say that I will recommend this album as well, but I want to give it the caveat that if you're coming into it and if you've listened to maybe Beastie Boys over the years, or you really like some of their stuff, especially in Intergalactic Planetary, right? That kind of thing. This is a far cry from that. This is a niche album. This is an album that is not commercial. And this is an album that really you're going to get more enjoyment out of it, as Joe stated earlier, listening to it as an album front to back and putting it on, and rather than pulling a song here and there. So I'm definitely recommend. I mean, it is sonically and production wise and engineering wise and lyrically an amazing album. But it may not be for everyone because, as we stated in this as well, we don't really know who this album was made for, but it's fucking good.
I find some of my favorite albums are the ones I don't know who the audience was for it.
Right.
I mean, even amongst, like, we'll probably do Floyd albums down the road too, but there's some of those where I'm just like, who was the fucking audience for this?
Right. Right. Yeah. And we will get down with that because there are, like, I'll name one album right off the top of my head that I go, who was that for? Metal. Who was that for? That's one of those albums that you just go.
Here's a 30-minute rock odyssey.
Yeah, here's a 30-minute B-side to your record. Oh, you're getting 6 songs here, 5 songs here. Flip it over, you're getting 1 song, motherfucker.
Well, that's kind of like what the Beastie Boys did here with the B-Boy Boulaway.
Yes.
The vinyl, it took up a side.
Yep.
So,
yep.
I mean, they took a cue from, album rock. And I guess if there is an audience, I think it was for people who are just obsessed over albums.
Yes.
And, I think this is a perfect album for nerds like us.
It really is. And I think there's that amalgamation because not only is this a rap album, but a hip hop album, but it's a punk album. I mean, you can feel the punk influence on this very, very heavily. Like, just the way that they're coming across, the way that they rap and the tones which they become known for, you get that vibe, like, it's this really awesome amalgamation of several different genres in one, but focusing all of it through a hip hop lens, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's just, again, it's just like it. The last thing that I'm not the biggest fan of B-Boy Boulaway, but this feels like a Boulaway of everything just thrown onto an album, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say it's aimless because an album like this can't be aimless by design.
Exactly.
It's so concise with the samples and the beats. You really can't noodle. There's just no room for it.
No. And again, it's kind of like, to me, again, as I've said, this is Odelay 2.0, right? Odelay is the same thing. There is no aim. It's just the journey through the album and listening to the sonic of it. And I feel like that's, I mean, if you're looking for an album that's going to have a point or is presented in a way that has, like some albums are, where they're very specific in, like, the rising, they're meticulous about the moves they put you through, the movements. Like track 1 starts here, and then by the time you get to track 3, it takes this turn, and by track 7, you're down this road. You're not getting that here. You're not going to get that here.
No. These guys are kind of the king of curveballs.
Oh, God,
I mean, they recorded an instrumental jazz album, Paul.
I mean, these are the guys that out of nowhere, out of everyone, recorded Sabotage.
Yeah.
I mean, when you listen to Paul,
Intergalactic after that.
Yeah, they did
best hip hop songs, in my opinion, ever.
Yes.
And just how stupid it is, but like the beat and like, oh God, it's such a perfect song for me.
It is. I would consider them, truthfully, the Radiohead of hip hop, where most people stay in a certain way, and they didn't give a fuck. They'll just go any direction they want to go when they want to do it.
Yeah, and I think especially in the late '80s into the '90s, I think other artists saw that shit, they did that. Why can't we do something different? I'm sure a lot of them weren't able to. Like, I'm sure just because the Beastie Boys did it doesn't mean you can, guys.
Yeah,
You're not the Beastie Boys.
You're not the Beastie Boys, and there was a lot of failures from bands trying to emulate them, and that's more of a testament to the genius of what they were doing. And I really think that while they were doing that, I think there was a lot of fumbling through it.
That's life. It's a learning process, man.
Yeah.
And their albums, this is the last album until their very last one. It's one of after this, they start playing instruments, mm-hmm. and they only have like maybe one or two albums after this where they're not playing any instruments at all. This one is it's pure sample. It's pure them, sample. The Dust Brothers, and Mario C. Their DJ. Man, it was like you bring up Kid A and Amnesiac, and it's just like it's kind of like what Radiohead did.
Yeah,
yeah. It's just kind of like sit in a studio and just fuck around and come up with magic.
Yeah, you just this is going to sound derogatory. I don't mean it to be or punching downward because it's not, but it's the classic awesome case of failing upward. You fucked around and came out with magic.
Well, I mean, I feel like some of that could be attributed to Eraserhead. Obligatory Lynch reference.
Yes, obligatory reference, and that is a fail upward. I mean, that
there's
was
no reason that movie should be still sold today.
No, there's no reason, and yet it is. I mean, and there's no reason why it should still be talked about. I mean, but there is. I mean, when you see it, there is. So yeah, I do. I'm going to agree with you and say, yeah, this is an album that I would completely recommend and enjoyed listening to, outside of looking down a barrel of a gun and what comes around, and really, if you're a fan of, again, for me, once Odelay popped in my head, I'm like, I know what I'm in for. Like, this is just, and I remembered it, the memory gear kicked in. I'm like, this is just a ride. Like, I'm just going to sit here and let the Beastie Boys take me where I'm going to go. And it's fun mostly the way through.
Yeah. I have just one on this. Do you know whatever happened to the Dust Brothers?
The Dust Brothers?
Yeah. It seemed like they had a meteoric rise in the 90s, and then they just kind of...
So the Dust Brothers, I know a little bit about it, and I'll talk to you about it. There was some controversy there. Not much. Just mostly in their name, because of the Chemical Brothers. But they did a lot of things on like soundtracks. I mean, they worked with as they did Odelay. They worked on Vince Young's second solo album. They worked with Korn on Kick the PA for the Spawn soundtrack. They did stuff for Fight Club. They really started getting into like movies and that kind of thing. They were responsible for the collaboration between Carlos Santana and Eagle Eye Cherry on Supernatural. And then they went back and worked with Beck on Guerrero. They worked with Tenacious D on their debut, Linkin Park, but they've kind of just they're still doing things, just kind of behind the scenes. I think they just kind of dabble now and have some semi-retired. They just come out when they want.
Soundtrack work and all that, or that sort of thing, probably pays more than, because nobody made a dime off Paul's Boutique and probably for like 20 years.
Well, and what's so funny is that it was considered in Time magazine in 2006 one of the best albums. It came out in '89. It took 7 years for it to get recognized as an amazing album. you know. And I think they owe Odelay a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, Odelay's a fantastic album.
Yeah, Odelay's a fantastic album, and I think, again, if you like Odelay, it's here, it's in this album.
Yeah, this is like the patient zero of Odelay.
Yeah, it really is. But yeah, they've kind of, they've just kind of doing this small things. They worked with They Might Be Giants album. They're just doing what they want when they want. I think they've made enough money.
Well, they didn't make it off this. We know that.
Nobody made money on this.
All right. Well, that's Paul's Boutique. All right. Paul, you're up next for the pick for Rate That Album. Tell us about your pick.
So my pick is an album that I don't think anyone would expect from me based upon conversations and things that we've had. We're going to be doing Off der Mauer by Melissa Off der Mauer, who is a Canadian musician, singer-songwriter, photographer, and actress. And I'll get into a lot of her career, but this album, her self-titled album, really was 10 years in the making. So this is going to be one of those things that she started working on when she was doing a lot of different, like, these are songs that she worked on through the years and finally put out an album. So, but that's going to be it. And if you don't know who she is, you know the bands that she worked with: Tinker, Hole, Smashing Pumpkins, Chelsea, Hand of Doom. She's worked with Fountains of Wayne, The Stills, Rufus Wainwright. So yeah, she's been around and is one of those muses in music.
Interesting. Yep, I was not expecting that.
No. And like I said, you wouldn't be expecting that. We'd probably think something else. But yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to have you listen to this album. It's accessible. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Spotify. So it's there. It's not a hard one to get it and a hard one to find, actually.
Awesome.
Yep. So it's her self-titled, essentially off her last name, debut.
I'm excited to listen. I'm always game for new music. So
yeah, if you haven't listened to it, you're in for something unique. Let me put it that way.
All right.
I'm interested to hear your take on this album.
All right. Well, next week we'll find out.
All right. Well, I think for the audience that came over from Twin Peaks, or new audience members that are coming over from the Joe-Down, I really, really appreciate you guys taking this journey with us. Joe, we're going to do the obligatory plugging part. Joe, what do you have going on right now with the Joe-Down?
Yeah, so we just reviewed Kung Fury.
So good.
Brilliant movie. Up next is a movie you guys did a Cast That Movie for.
Ooh, what movie would that be?
Maximum Overdrive.
Oh, shit.
A movie so coked up, the director doesn't remember making it.
He does not remember making it. We talked about that ad nauseum in our Cast That Movie. Wow. I'm interested to see what your take is on the Joe-Down and get your opinion of that when that comes out, because I have mine.
It's a wild.
Yes, and
experience.
me and Jode were very divided on our thoughts on that movie.
Yeah. It's a cult classic. You know me with cult classics and bad movies.
Well,
I'm like a fly to a light with bad movies.
You and I both, sir. And I explain it too in our Cast That Movie for those that didn't listen. Go listen to that because I bring this up. This was a film that, along with Beastmaster and Another 48 Hours, was played constantly on TNT and TBS.
Don't forget about Bloodsport.
And Bloodsport. Oh my God, Bloodsport was, yes, those. Beastmaster, Another 48 Hours, Maximum Overdrive, Bloodsport, TBS, TNT, on like you would not go a weekend without being able to watch Maximum Overdrive.
No. Yeah, it's something else. What about you? What do you got going on, Paul?
Well, I'm behind on my podcasts, at least getting them up and getting them edited. I've kind of gone off the rails with the holidays. I'm still using that as an excuse because I just got so much going on. I'm just still waiting for things to come down. My house is still a disaster because we just celebrated our second Christmas thing this last weekend. So I haven't been able to get out of that mindset or that mode. Just because of, Voldemort and that type of thing. We've had to move things around. So we are almost done with Twin Peaks, podcast above a convenience store, talking Twin Peaks. We have all of them recorded except for the final episode. I'm Bears Beats a Bobbleheads and Cast That Movie. I'm reaching out to my partner Scott on those this week to see when we're going to starting those up. And I have 2 episodes of the brand new podcast with our brand new partner, Griffin E., for A Tour of Hawkins, a podcast about Stranger Things.
Nice.
Which you are going to be, she invited you into it. So I don't know if you want to come all the time. That's something we can talk about off air. But, your schedule on when you want to join that is your schedule.
Sounds good. Trust me, I got a lot of crossover conspiracy theories with that and Parks and Recreation.
Ooh, very interesting. I think that
both take place in Indiana, man. There's layers upon layers.
You think Patton Oswalt's going to show up to filibuster and see?
One of the best TV moments ever.
Oh my God. My favorite is going on YouTube and finding the extended where he just went off for like 10 minutes and was like, "Can we stop?"
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm excited to get back, getting these things up and done. I mean, again, they are done. They are there. We didn't not do them. So for those of you that have been kind of, hammering at the mouth for these things, by the time you listen to this podcast, those will have already been put out. So, other than that, I think this was a great first episode, honestly, and I really like the dynamic of it. And I hope our audience did too.
I do too. I like it. I like shooting the shit on music. I don't get to do it as much as I used to. So
neither do I. So this is an awesome outlet. So when you brought this up as the follow-up to Twin Peaks, again, not we go off on side tangents, not probably what you'd expect us to do coming off of Twin Peaks, but lo and behold, here we are, and I'm really glad we are.
I am too. And so. Until next time, Paul.
What you want?